coming inbound, but you have to inspect that all for the right things, and the attack code is not yet known. And there's lots of ways to tweak it slightly to pass signatures. So here's the controversial advice. Stop using it. This is something we've been considering, advice we've been considering giving for a while. It's not intended to be a cheap shot at Internet Explorer or Microsoft. Given the case history and the vulnerabilities and the repeated vulnerabilities in the same technologies, we feel that this actually may be reasonable advice to give people. Now the question is it really reasonable? And we've done some technical analysis to try to see if this is really the case. Maybe the best way to phrase the advice is don't use IE for your simple everyday day-to-day browsing. Don't click on those URLs just for the hell of it with IE. Don't browse wildly with IE. If you have an application or certain websites that require IE, and there certainly are sites that are built, unfortunately, that they will only work with Internet Explorer, put them in your trusted site zone. Hopefully they are authenticated with HTTPS. Use IE for those sites that you trust. Email raises a big question. Outlook and Outlook Express use the pieces of Internet Explorer, and they are commonly affected by all the IE holes. Now, Outlook and Outlook Express, especially recently, have taken great steps improving security, blocking of certain types of attachments, opening mail in a restricted site zone, disabling scripting, etc. However, there's a vulnerability that defeats some of the checking that'll still affect the mail readers. So if you're going to try to be very careful about this, don't use those programs. Choose another email reader that doesn't use. You have to be careful that it does not use the IE components. A good example here is Eudora, which uses the MHTML component to render HTML. I believe that's a setting. I believe it is on by default, and you can turn it off. But it's something you have to go and do. There's probably plenty of other Windows mail readers that use the IE to render HTML. So even if you don't use IE day to day, you can't necessarily uninstall it. Lots of other Windows programs and components of Windows use parts of IE to get browser or network functionality, or to render HTML, or to handle some of the protocols. So even if you don't use IE to browse, a great example here is the MHTML vulnerability. It's conceivable, and I didn't thoroughly test this, but if I were using a different browser on the system, and I clicked a URL that started with MHTML, the protocol handlers are part of Windows, as opposed to just IE. So clicking on the MHTML URL in Opera, for instance, may still invoke the Windows system-wide MHTML protocol handler, which then invokes IE. And so our advice to not use IE is pointless here. You used Opera, you're still hit by the attack. So the advice is not, just not using IE is just not going to protect you. You need to use IE appropriately, consider your email system appropriately, consider your level of trust appropriately. If you're able to use the web generally with active scripting and ActiveX disabled, a lot of sites don't look so good, may not function at all, that might be a reasonable way to use IE. Clearly stay patched. If you feel like investigating Service Pack 2 for XP, good advice as well. So to wrap things up to a point, through no fault of its own, Microsoft is a wonderful business, but it's the predominant operating system, and it's got the predominant default web browser and web components. It's everywhere. Any attacker with an ounce of intelligence is going to attack the common technology. The initial design, which has unfortunately been fairly much cast now, favors features, integration with the operating system, interoperability, programmability, user interface. All these things are favored, and the decision was probably, in our opinion, too far to the side of of integration versus actual security here. There's a common thought in the security community: complexity breeds insecurity. A very complex program is going to be inherently less secure. It's harder to implement. It's harder to code properly. There are apparently so many places where a zone check or a domain check has to be made in IE that they're just not all right. There's enough ways to confuse the check that there's been this history of cross-domain vulnerabilities. The feature-rich, the rich feature set, the programmability, the interoperability is a great thing. But when it's exploited by attackers from the trust level of the local system, it's a huge liability. The ability to programmatically instantiate an ActiveX object, which does a GET request, sucks down my malware, another ActiveX object that writes it out to the file system, and then a URL handler that runs the file that I just downloaded. Those are great features, but from the local machine zone, it's a huge liability. It completely and easily enables the attacker to easily develop attack that installs arbitrary code on the system. Cross-domain vulnerabilities are the key. All these features, well segmented, are fine, they're safe. When they're not well segmented because somebody failed a zone check, that's the problem. And unfortunately, the history of this suggests there will be other cross-zone issues. So try to be proactive, investigate turning off, securing the local machine zone, scripting an ActiveX in the internet zone, watch what you're doing with your email, maybe try to limit your Internet Explorer use or use a different browser for less trusted websites.